Jack Smith Day to all who celebrate. First, a sitting U.S. congressman is now openly threatening Haitian immigrants, all of whom are here legally, some of whom have been here for generations. Clay Higgins, the disgraced ex-cop from Louisiana who fabricated a story about evidence he fabricated about a thing he fabricated called January 6th ghost buses, told the Haitians to, quote, get their ass out of our country before January 20th in a tweet. Over a screenshot of the news we mentioned yesterday here, that a group representing the immigrants in Springfield, Ohio, that Trump and Senator Vance and other Republicans are trying to get killed via stochastic terrorism, that group was suing to try to force the prosecution of Trump and Vance for breaking the law by such incitement. Higgins writes, lol, these Haitians are wild, eating pets, voodoo, nastiest country in the Western Hemisphere, cults, slapstick gangsters, but damned if they don't feel all sophisticated now, filing charges against our president and VP. All these thugs better get their mind right and their ass out of our country before January 20th, unquote. Leaving aside the question of whose mind is right, Clay Higgins apparently thinks J.V. Vance is vice president right now, just because his fascist party has nominated him. The blowback was immediate. Before the House adjourned yesterday, the chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus attempted to get Higgins immediately censured for his racist language and his violent threats against legal residents of the United States. Nevada's Stephen Horsford says he confronted Higgins and demanded Higgins delete the tweet. Quoting Horsford, he actually told me no, he would not. Horsford's censure bid was blocked for the moment by Republicans led by Speaker Mike Johnson, also an ass from Louisiana. Johnson, who Tuesday revealed, by what he refused to say, that he would be on the side of the next Republican attempt to nullify the election by legal trickery, just as he was on the side of the last Republican attempt to do so, said that this matter was now closed because Higgins did in fact delete the "get their ass out of our country" tweet. Johnson claimed Higgins, quote, prayed about it, and he regretted it, and he pulled the post down. That's what you want a gentleman to do. I'm sure he probably regrets some of the language he used, Johnson says, but you know, we move forward. We believe in redemption around here. Right. The only regret Clay Higgins has about the language he used is that he stopped himself from using the N-word to describe the targets of his stochastic terrorism. Johnson, who has long since solidified his reputation as the smarmiest and most morally weightless speaker in the history of the House of Representatives, did not explain why this scumbag Higgins didn't pray about his tweet before he posted it and reignited the nightmare unfolding in Ohio and elsewhere for Haitian Americans and Irish Americans and Ohioan Americans and non-psychotic people named Higgins Americans. The most positive thing that can be said about the Higgins threat is that he declared he only wanted all the Haitians to leave the United States within 4 months, rather than to have them all killed. I don't know what kind of redemption Johnson thinks is possible here any longer, but bluntly, the only redemption is that of the United States of America, and it involves putting slime like Clay Higgins in prison or in a psychiatric institution as quickly as possible and getting them out of the goddamned House of Representatives before it's too late. It is Clay Higgins or America. It is Clay Higgins and a fascist apartheid state in which every lie is truth as long as it is directed against someone who is not powerful or white, or the America we have spent 248 years trying to improve, even when white trash like Clay Higgins and those hiding their tolerance for bigotry behind tailored suits like Speaker Johnson have tried to turn this country back to Jim Crow, to lynchings, slavery, xenophobia, racism, and an attitude that at its core amounts to this: my ancestors were allowed to come here and make my life possible. Yours are not. Why? Because I say so. If at any point between now and Election Day you stop being enraged that Donald Trump and his fellow peddler of cultural heroin, J.D. Vance, have let worser creatures like Clay Higgins crawl out of the woodwork. If you flag between now and then, suck it up. The election of November 5th is as existential for this nation as was the Civil War, and many of the issues are unchanged from the Civil War. And the results must be identical. And by the way, the phrase cultural heroin to describe what Trump has done to America, that was coined in 2016 by J.D. Vance. As we await the amended Jack Smith filing in Washington, again we find ourselves on the subject of how far Trump is gone mentally. Here comes your 19th nervous breakdown this month. Yesterday, Trump forgot he already admitted he lost the 2020 election, quote, by a whisker, and then insisted, no, he didn't mean that. He was being sarcastic and cynical when he said whisker. And so he yesterday went back and again admitted that he lost the 2020 election by a whisker.
More votes than any sitting president in the history of our country. But they beat us by a whisker. They beat us just by a little whisker.
I am now waiting for somebody to ask drooling J. Trump about the whisker and for him to say he was being sarcastic and cynical so we can start this crap cycle all over again. Trump's new thing is that he has been targeted for assassination twice by Iran. That the assassination attempts were by Iran in some way. This is not entirely one of his hallucinations. He was apparently briefed on what Secretary of State Blinken went public about yesterday, that Iran has targeted dozens of top U.S. officials, including virtually everybody now in the White House and Trump, with assassination and hacking and everything else. Of course, to Trump, all the languages of the world, all spoken sounds sound like the teacher in the Charlie Brown specials. So all he would have heard in that briefing was, Trump, Iran. And then, of course, Trump added the motive to this Iranian plot to kill him and only him. And they want to kill him because of the furniture. Because he's trying to bring back the furniture finishing business to Mint Hill in North Carolina. I bet even now you think I'm kidding about this one. I'm not kidding about this one.
All of your furniture makers are going to come back and come back bigger and stronger and better than ever before. They're mostly gone. They're all coming back. This is why people in countries want to kill me. They're not happy with me. It's a risky business. This is why they want to kill me. They only kill consequential presidents, remember that.
Not at all insane. The Iranians want to kill him because he's bringing the furniture business back to North Carolina. From Tehran, I guess. Because they only kill consequential presidents, the ones who restore America's furniture factories. He is trying to pre-brag on himself in case they actually assassinate him. Oh, he's fine. He's out of his freaking gourd. He continues to sound high as a kite. And in the video that accompanied what you just heard, his face looked like a box of melting candlesticks. But tell me again, Lindsey Graham, about why you don't think that if he's returned to office, he's still going to kill us all, including you. That day had begun just after Tuesday turned into Wednesday with the briefest, craziest, most harrowing Trump social media post of all time, and I know I'm really saying something when I say that. At 12:12 a.m. Wednesday, Trump posted, quote, "A great day in Louisiana." He was in Georgia. That is perhaps why it was a great day in Louisiana. Meanwhile, what follows here was an actual surprise. Harris Faulkner of Fox News, dressed up like a cross between Angela Lansbury and the Manchurian Candidate and a slightly cleaned-up version of Ri Chun-hee, the anchor propagandist from North Korea Nightly News. Harris Faulkner explains to guest Congresswoman Nancy Mace that Trump was, let's just say that according to what Harris Faulkner said, it appears we've all been burying the lead these last 24 hours.
Why would anybody want to block information about the assassination of former President Trump?
By the way, if I'm going to tell you Harris Faulkner was dressed up like that North Korean news lady, in fairness, I have to tell you Nancy Mace was wearing a pearl necklace. No, a real one. Two national polls of note from yesterday, both head-to-head and full candidate slate by YouGov for The Economist. Harris by 3. ActiVote, for whatever ActiVote is worth, Harris by 3. The swing states are all over the map, no pun intended. Harris by 3 in Pennsylvania by Monmouth, or by 2 by Focal Data, or tied by RMG and SP&R. I'm imagining one of them's right. Maybe of the most interest this week from the pollsters. Survey USA has polled Nebraska. Hasn't been done in a while. Districts 1 and 3 are Trump landslides. District 2, the blue dot, is Harris by 15. There is no surprise there. It is the Nebraska Senate polling that is dumbfounding. Incumbent Republican Senator Fisher trails independent Dan Osborne 45-44. The Republican is losing within the margin of error for the Senate from Nebraska. Dan Osborne is a steam fitter, a Navy vet, a union leader, and a Democrat registered since 2016. He is proving that the oldest of Republican tricks can work both ways. If and when your party affiliation is going to cost you a point or a vote, just pretend it never happened. Speaking of which, we swing back to that little shit Mike Johnson, who has ordered Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky to fire his ambassador, the Ukrainian ambassador, to the United States because Zelensky went to the factory in Pennsylvania where munitions for Ukraine have been manufactured. No, seriously. Little big man Mike thinks he runs two governments rather than, none. The Republicans have now decided that the Zelensky factory visit was a campaign event and thus interference in the American election by Zelensky because Governor Josh Shapiro was at the factory too, and Shapiro was briefly a candidate to be Kamala Harris's running mate. No, seriously. Johnson is on firmer ground with Clay Higgins than he is with this one. Or with the other half of this, Johnson's little fat-ass henchman James Comer claims to be opening an investigation into Zelensky and the visit, and he wants the testimony of Merrick Garland and Lloyd Austin, and I don't know, he wants Jesus to testify because, of course, Trump is still pissed about that little favor he needed from Zelensky. Also, Comer has apparently decided that since his entire life has now become an utter failure because he never even took a vote on impeaching Biden as president, what the hell? Maybe he can still try to impeach Zelensky as president. And yes, of course, James Comer, Mike Johnson, and Clay Higgins are not just congressional viruses with shoes. They all constitute part of Louisiana's Republican delegation. Nice work, Louisiana. Thank you for sending us your spoiled oysters. Also of interest here, okay, the newsy RFK story may be petering out, but not before London's Daily Mail interviewed Dr. Christina Irene Gillespie. And who is she? Well, we know this much about her. She had the dignity to tell the London Rag, I am taking care of patients right now. Please don't call back. Oh, if only all of us could have said something like that. An explanation is next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead of us on this edition of Countdown, I was watching the MSNBC promo campaign to advertise Kamala Harris's first interview last night. First one-on-one with somebody named Stephanie on a Wednesday at 7 p.m., but they're trying to make it count in the 8 p.m. ratings by calling it the Chris Hayes Show. It's the first one of those. I mean, it's like these endless, nauseating baseball desperate efforts to make clubs a thing. Shohei Ohtani has 7 triples, 4 caught stealings, and 10 intentional walks. He's just become the first member of the 7-4-10 club. Anyway, these advertisements made it dawn on me anew that there is a prominent MSNBC anchor who 20 years ago was actively trying to destroy MSNBC and me and the Democratic Party on behalf of George W. Bush, and nobody even bats an eye about what she's doing now. And it wasn't Joe Scarborough. The saga of the White House that couldn't spell straight next in Things I Promised Not to Tell. First, there are still more new idiots to talk about. The daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's worst persons in the world. A preamble. There is no Newsy Nudes news network today, although the London Daily Mail managed to get a 5-word no comment from Newsy's former fiance's former wife. And that led me to figure out that relative to me, she is, are you ready? She is my ex-girlfriend's ex-fiance's, because of my ex-friend's sext's ex-wife. It's a lot of X's. I also feel compelled to compliment the New York Post on turning Monday's account in this podcast into the first kind of fair, not cynical, not inaccurate story involving me in the Post in the last 30 years. They also spelled my name correctly roughly 25% of the time in the piece, which I think is a new accuracy record for the Post. Bravo, sir! Anyway, the bronze, worse, Sheriff Bruce Zukowski of Portage County, Ohio. Told you about Bruce previously. He's the guy with no neck and a bad rug who told voters there, told them on his official sheriff's Facebook page, to look for Kamala Harris campaign signs in yards in Portage County, Ohio, and write down the addresses so that when the billions of the immigrants are sent to their Ohio towns to eat their, I don't know, what is the lie now? To eat their babies? What is it? Is it fish? What is it? Anyway, write down their addresses so you can then send the migrants, or as Sheriff Zukowski called them with his 7th grade education, the locust, to live at those houses. That was his excuse, of course. Writing down addresses of who is supporting the Democrat in a red county is stochastic terrorism. Well, God bless the Elections Board of Portage County, Ohio. They, including one of the 2 Republicans, decided that Sheriff Zukowski was way over the line here. They have barred their own sheriff's office from providing the security during early voting, having determined that the mere sight of Zukowski's brown shirts may serve as an illegal form of electoral intimidation. They say they will borrow another county's officers or hire private security instead. The one member of the board who voted to keep the Nazis running the elections says the real victims here are Zukowski's officers who committed no crime and blah, 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 blah. People were literally saying at a town meeting they were now afraid to vote because of what he posted. Zukowski should be rotting in prison for this, but I don't think we have the laws to put him there. Yet. The runner-up, worser, Jamie Dimon, CEO of J.P. Morgan, and just as big a money-grubbing swine as the founder of the firm was. Quote, "If you do not control the borders, you are going to destroy our country. Now that they are sending migrants into New York," he said on the Money is More Important Than Life network CNBC, "now that they are sending migrants into New York, all my super liberal friends realize what a problem it is." Once again, I cherish my ancestors. I love the thought of my great-great-grandfather, Frederick Olbermann, getting off the boat at Castle Garden in New York and opening up his blacksmith shop at 46th and 5th in the year 1847, and me maybe going back in time and telling him, "Look, Fred, never mind the blacksmith shop. Try to buy this land right here." I love the fact that I am the end result of his courage. Lord knows I don't have his courage, just the blessings. Jamie Dimon, as the online commentator NYC Southpaw notes, Jamie Dimon dishonors his ancestors. Quoting Jamie Dimon's paternal grandfather, Panos Papadimitriou, immigrated from Greece to New York in 1921, the year a racist reaction against Southern and Eastern European immigration led to the Quota Act. So, did Jamie Dimon's grandfather get into this country legally or illegally? Let's see the documents, Jamie. The last time we decided that we had to control the borders to keep immigrant scum like Jamie Dimon's grandfather out, what happened then? May your grandfather come back from the dead, Jamie, and drain your bank accounts and give all the money to the new immigrants who count, not like you, MFer. But our winners, the worst, a tie between two senators we have thankfully disposed of, Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona. And yes, if you are new to the podcast, I went out with her for a while too. And she and I also went to see Book of Mormon twice. And even I'm getting tired of this. And when I say tired, I mean I'm not tired at all. I mean, what's the phrase I'm thinking of? Laughing hysterically about all this. Anywho, you've heard Manchin, who is a scumbag that we've all pretended to be nice to for 20 years because he occasionally voted with the Democrats in the Senate. He says he will not endorse Kamala Harris for president because she wants to eliminate the filibuster in order to enshrine Roe v. Wade in federal law. Now, setting aside for the moment the reality that this will probably increase Harris's vote count in West Virginia because they don't like Manchin there either, let's move on to his fellow theoretical constitutionalist idiot. Kyrsten Sinema is a very different kind of person from Manchin. She's not really a moron. She's in fact exceedingly bright. But as they would say in baseball, she has reverse Dunning-Kruger splits. She knows she's smart. But unlike most smart people who think, well, if I know this, lots of other people must know it too, she thinks she's not only the smartest one in the room, but the only smart one in the room. Sinny, responding to the plan to eliminate the filibuster, quote, to state the supremely obvious, eliminating the filibuster to codify Roe v. Wade also enables a future Congress to ban all abortion nationwide. Honey, what an absolutely terrible, short-sighted idea. What has not dawned on Kyrsten, because she is the smartest one in the room and the only one that's smart in the room, the rest of us are all idiots. What's not dawned on her is that her pals, the Republicans, they're not going to wait for Congress to ban all abortion nationwide. They're going to do it themselves. The next Republican president will do it himself. He'll probably send troops into the states that still permit abortion. And if he wants to make it all actually legal, if there's a Republican-controlled Senate, he'll have them eliminate the filibuster or force an exception to it, like the exceptions to the filibuster have been forced roughly 150 times in my lifetime alone. Idiots. Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kyrsten, you self-satisfied, unimaginative, smug ass clown Sinema, today's worst persons in the world! Finally, to the number one story on the countdown and my favorite topic, me, and things I promised not to tell. And on Monday, May 3rd, 2004, my executive producer phoned me at home and said, "We got Ambassador Joe Wilson. He'll be on the show tomorrow." Within hours, the communications office of the White House of George W. Bush began a desperate, ceaseless, tireless effort to send me one email with talking points about Ambassador Joe Wilson, which repeatedly, hilariously failed to get through to me because none of them could spell my name correctly. By late in the evening of May the 3rd and throughout the morning of May the 4th, I got calls and forwarded emails from people throughout NBC who had received emails of their own from the Bush White House Communications Office, all of them with attachments addressed to Keith Olbermann, without the L, Keith Olbermann with only one N, Keith Olbermann, Keith spelled wrong, and even Keith Olbermann with a V. This was actually, truly, the first day I believed I was having an impact on the Bush White House, and also the first day I realized they were incredibly stupid there. Democracy still had a slim chance. The internet had been operating at more or less its present speed since about 1997 or 1998. My name was all over the internet in articles about my news career, about my sports career, about my previous news career. There were articles I had written, there were books I had written, and these people who were trying to reshape the United States of America into a reactionary, conservative, cruel, xenophobic, semi-authoritarian state were not smart enough to figure out how to spell my name. Just so we know who we are talking about, by this point, Scott McClellan had succeeded the infamous Ari Fleischer as press secretary. His deputies were Dana Perino, who went from being the stupidest person ever to be White House press secretary to being one of the stupidest persons ever to have a show on Fox News. Pamela Stevens, who later wound up as a producer at CNN because political press people are exactly like unemployed football coaches or baseball managers who get TV jobs and then leave the TV jobs to go back onto the field. The communications director was named Dan Bartlett, and there was another communications person there named Nicole Wallace, who has somehow shaken off the stink of working for both George and Jeb Bush and is now considered a darling of MSNBC, even though her only true non-fascist credential is she doesn't like Trump either. The crack White House media team representing the most powerful man in the world in the anxious and foreshadowing years after 9/11, and not one of them could even find anybody else who could spell my name, let alone spell it themselves. More on them in a moment, but I need to explain who Joe Wilson was, if you don't know, and why he was so important. Long before Colin Powell confessed to Tim Russert that he had been lied to by the White House and thus he himself had lied to the United Nations about Saddam Hussein's imaginary weapons of mass destruction, those were the excuses from Bush Cheney for dragging this country into an unnecessary and national soul-destroying war in Iraq with lies and torture and scapegoating and suppression and brutality. Before that, there was Ambassador Joseph Charles Wilson IV. And in 2002, after pressure from the White House, the CIA sent him back to the scene of his first diplomatic posting, the African nation of Niger, to get proof for Bush that Saddam was trying to buy yellow cake uranium there to make nuclear bombs out of. And Wilson quickly found out it was nonsense, and he reported back, and the Bush White House promptly buried his findings, and instead, in the 2003 State of the Union address just before he started bombing Iraq, George W. Bush said, "The British government has learned that Saddam Hussein recently sought significant quantities of uranium from Africa." It was, and remains, a complete lie. And war occurred because of it. And Joe Wilson called it a complete lie in an op-ed in the New York Times on July 6th, 2003. The Iraq War was still at this stage defined by, rah, rah, we're winning, but Saddam's WMD and his biological weapons and his chemical weapons might be over the next hill, and you'd better not criticize what we're doing, or maybe you're a terrorist. Joe Wilson said the emperor had no clothes in 2003. He was an American hero of the highest order. A week later, a Dick Cheney flunky named Scooter Libby and a deputy secretary of state named Armitage began a campaign to punish Joe Wilson and discredit him. They leaked to a dyspeptic and hate-filled columnist named Robert Novak, who is now working in the bureau in hell, that Wilson's wife was an undercover agent for the CIA and that her name was Valerie Plame, and that the pair of them were dirty Democrats, and moreover it was Plame who had urged that her own husband be sent to Niger to deliberately not find the uranium or the Saddam Hussein signed receipts or whatever Bush expected to find there. The Bush White House destroyed the career of, risked the life of, and ruined several assignments and contacts of one of this country's own secret CIA agents just to make her husband look bad. So in May 2004, when Joe Wilson wrote a book about all this crap and he inexplicably wanted to go on MSNBC, which was still at that point trying to be more conservative than Fox News, and wanted to go on my little-watched show, which was considered the neutral outlier on a network full of Joe Scarboroughs and Michael Savages, this was a happy surprise for us, which was followed by this wonderful flailing effort by the Bush White House to send me talking points about Joe Wilson before I interviewed him. They not only could not spell my name, but they were utterly convinced that my interview was designed to discredit Joe Wilson. The talking points, which eventually got to me from Assistant Press Secretary Pamela Stevens, consisted of 6 items over 2 pages. The headings were as follows. 1, political motivation. This was about Wilson calling Dick Cheney a lying SOB about a year after the Niger trip. I couldn't figure this one out. Dick Cheney was a lying SOB. That's how I got to be vice president. 2, Gingrich spokesman calls allegations about alleged March 2003 meeting completely false. This cited Newt Gingrich and his people as if they were good sources as opposed to the punchlines they already were back then in 2004. Talking point number 3, McClellan points out political objective, and 4, McClellan addresses accusations. These were quotes from the press secretary. This man suddenly quit that job 2 years later, 2006, and confessed he had repeatedly lied for George W. Bush and the others, and now he just couldn't take it anymore. And he would come on my show and give one of the best atonement interviews I've ever heard. It went on for 45 minutes. 5, Fleischer says VP office did not request trip. A quote from McClellan's predecessor, who, unless he is talking about baseball, you should assume he's lying. Plus, he might be lying about baseball. And finally, 6, statement by George J. Tenet, July 11, 2003. This was a quote from the CIA director, which they thought was their home run, and it basically consisted of this. Bush never saw that report. That was it. There are 3 punchlines to this story. Number 1, I don't know why the Bush Communications Office assumed I was there to take down Joe Wilson, but the moment I saw these talking points, any lingering doubt I had that they were not all lying bastards down there was erased. I used the talking points in my interview, all right. I read them out loud to Joe Wilson, and he rebutted each of them with impeccable charm and elegance. He and Valerie Plame became regular guests on my show and would beat the crap out of George Bush with aplomb right through the morning of January 20th, 2009. Second punchline. A year earlier, a supply clerk with a maintenance company on the ground in Iraq was captured. Private Jessica Lynch. The military and the Bush administration immediately put out the story that she was being tortured by them evil Iraqi Saddam Hussein doctors. There was the glorious rescue of Jessica Lynch, which followed, and the parades and the you better not question this story period, which lasted about 6 weeks, until a Toronto newspaper printed a substantially different account. That Lynch was rescued from an Iraqi hospital, and a U.S. military team in good faith went in to extract her, but that this was all arranged not by some sort of part of intelligence or U.S. operations or the Allies, but by the Iraqi doctors, some of whom sneaked over to American lines at great danger and said, one of your soldiers is hurt and we don't have the right equipment to help her. Could you swing by and pick her up? I reported that version on MSNBC, and the next day, as I was still taking my coat off, My boss, Phil Griffin, called me in and said that the head of NBC News and the president of NBC, Bob Wright, had been on the phone all morning to him, insisting I should be fired for implying that the Bush administration had lied. Griffin proudly said he had talked them into letting me get away with just apologizing to the troops. I can't even read this with a straight face now, 20 years later. Apologizing to the troops who rescued her. I must credit myself, when my brain was full then, that I did some quick thinking. The demand was comical nonsense journalistically. On the other hand, if I agreed to apologize to, the troops who rescued her, whoever you want, I would get the chance to tell the whole real story of Jessica Lynch again. So I did. The apology was 15 seconds, and while unnecessary, was sincere. I didn't want to make the troops look bad. They didn't know anything about this crap. I made sure, however, that the retelling of the true Lynch rescue story took about 2.5 minutes. That was in June of 2003. So why, as of May of 2004, the Bush White House thought I was sympathetic to them, I'll never know, or why they bothered with me, I'll never know. Which brings me to the last point. The unintended side effect with the long-term impact of all those failed White House emails with my name misspelled was that this Pamela Stevens person promptly forwarded them to people around NBC whom she considered friendly to George W. Bush. One of them was Tom Brokaw's assistant. Another was in the office of future NBC News President Steve Kappas. And the final one was to some guy named George Uribe. And so I found out all the people in the Bush administration's "we like them" list at NBC News who I should avoid under all circumstances. Let's see. Brokaw's assistant, so no Brokaw. Somebody in Kappas's office, so no Kappas. And this guy, George Uribe. And George Uribe turned out to be a guy hired by MSNBC from Fox News to go work for George Scarborough. He fell out of favor with Joe Scarborough, and I guess he didn't henchman enough for Joe's taste. And his influence fell to a guy I don't think I've mentioned him to you yet. Chris Licht. I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. We're now back to 5 episodes a week, posting nightly just after midnight Eastern. Once again, there is a Monday countdown. Please forward this podcast to a non-listener who should start listening, and start listening now. Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel, the musical directors of Countdown, arranged, produced, and performed most of our music. Mr. Chanel handled orchestration and keyboards. Mr. Ray was on guitars, bass, and drums. It was produced by TKO Brothers. Our satirical and pithy musical comments are by the best baseball stadium organist ever, Nancy Faust. The sports music is the Olbermann theme from ESPN2, written by Mitch Warren Davis, courtesy of ESPN Inc. Other music arranged and performed by the group No Horns Allowed. My announcer today was my friend Nancy Faust. Everything else was, as usual, pretty much my fault. That's Countdown for today. 5 weeks and 5 days until the 2024 presidential election and the 1,360th day since convicted felon drooling J. Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Use the election, use the mental health system, use presidential immunity if we have to keep him from doing it again while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. Bulletins as the news requires. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. I miss the post, and good luck.
They only kill consequential presidents. Remember that.